Imagine living for nearly 3 decades in a country where leaving is forbidden. Barbed wire, concrete walls, the entire nation turned into a cage. Even daring to look beyond those walls could cost you your life. And then, suddenly, it all collapses. But let's start from the beginning. In this episode, we'll uncover what led to the desperate decision to build this wall. We'll explore how effective and deadly this structure really was, and the courage of those who risked everything to defy concrete, bullets, and brutal border guards. We'll also recall the twist of fate that brought this wall of shame to its knees, and the officer whose single decision changed history forever.
After World War II, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones: Soviet, American, British, and French. Although Berlin lay deep within the Soviet-controlled area, the Potsdam Conference decided that the city itself would also be split into 4 sectors. The USSR took East Berlin, which included the central Mitte district, home to the Brandenburg Gate and the Reichstag building, along with the industrial areas of Friedrichshain and Lichtenberg, the green suburbs of Treptow, Köpenick, Weissensee, and Pankow, the mixed residential industrial Prenzlauer Berg, and the rural zones of Hellersdorf and Marzahn.
The American sector covered the southwest, the commercial Steglitz, Zehlendorf to the north, as well as the elegant Charlottenburg and residential Wilmersdorf. The French administered the northern districts, including the working-class Wedding and the suburban Reinickendorf.
But the Kremlin wanted the entire city. On June 24, 1948, Moscow launched the Berlin blockade, cutting off West Berlin from all rail and road connections to Western Germany. For 323 days, American and European pilots kept the city alive, delivering food, medicine, coal, and other essentials by air. In the end, the Soviet Union lifted the blockade because the Berlin airlift had proven unstoppable.
The blockade pushed the Western powers to create NATO. At the same time, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France decided to merge their administrative zones and proclaimed the Federal Republic of Germany, a democratic nation built on a free market economy. In response, the Soviet leadership turned its occupation zone into the German Democratic Republic. Backed directly by the Kremlin, East Germany became Moscow's strategic stronghold in Central Europe. West Berlin adopted a constitution that recognized the city as a federal state within West Berlin. Though there was much legal wrangling over its status, in practice, West Berlin functioned as part of the Federal Republic. Its economy, fueled by the Marshall Plan and market reforms, began to boom. East Germany, however, could not compete. Its planned economy and limited Soviet support led to stagnation, shortages of consumer goods, and widening income gaps between East and West. As living conditions worsened and state security tightened its grip, East Germans began fleeing en masse to the West. By 1961, nearly 3 million people had escaped to the Federal Republic, most of them through the open gateway of West Berlin.
Crossing between sectors in the city remained relatively free, and for East German leaders, that openness looked like a direct threat to state stability and legitimacy. By the late 1950s, some 10,000 American, British, and French troops were stationed in West Berlin, a presence that deterred the GDR and the USSR from simply absorbing the city into East Germany. Meanwhile, at home, people were urged to act together to deter a hostile neighbor and to back civic initiatives. Some even framed as contests with prizes, encouraging mass participation in support campaigns. Back in the Cold War drama, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, waving the threat of force, presented the West with an ultimatum. Within 6 months, demilitarize West Berlin, turn it into a free city, and hand over control of all transport corridors to the East German authorities. After tense negotiations, President Dwight D. Eisenhower managed to get the ultimatum withdrawn, but Khrushchev later reissued the same demand to the new U.S. President, John F. Kennedy.
But Kennedy didn't take the bait. Instead, he ordered additional U.S. troops into West Berlin and delivered a firm message. We cannot and will not permit the communists to drive us out of Berlin, neither gradually nor by force. We must honor our repeated pledge to the free people of West Berlin and defend our rights and their safety even in the face of threats, so that other free nations can continue to trust both our word and our resolve. The East German response came swiftly. On the evening of August 12, 1961, in direct violation of Allied agreements, the GDR suddenly sealed all movement between the city's sectors. Troops flooded the streets and completely blocked the border. Within 3 days, barbed wire stretched across Berlin. Construction of the wall had begun. Rail lines were cut, tram routes shut down, and 4 subway lines were severed. 16 stations in the eastern part of the city were closed. The trains simply passed through without stopping. At Friedrichstrasse station, a checkpoint was set up and the U2 line was split in 2. Residents living near the border were forced to move. Windows facing West Berlin were bricked up, phone lines were cut, and even the city's water and sewage pipes were sealed with heavy grates. Western leaders reacted with outrage. The U.S. government issued a formal protest, holding the Soviet Union fully responsible for the move, calling it a one-sided violation of Berlin's four-power status, one that could only heighten existing tension and danger. West Berlin's mayor, Willy Brandt, added that the Soviet government must clearly understand how dangerously it was testing the limits of the four-power agreement.
Tension spiked sharply on October 22, 1961, when East German border guards refused entry to a car carrying Alan Leitner, head of the U.S. mission in West Berlin, at Checkpoint Charlie. 4 days later, on October 26th, the car was finally allowed through, but only after U.S. tanks arrived at the border. The next day, even more armored vehicles, jeeps, and bulldozers rolled in. East Germany responded with armored personnel carriers and water cannons, while Soviet tanks moved in. American infantry took positions with bazookas, and both sides were prepared to fire. Fortunately, diplomacy prevailed. By the morning of October 28th, U.S. and Soviet leaders reached an agreement and the tanks withdrew. While the Western coalition had effectively tolerated this brazen communist move, outrage simmered beneath the surface. The wall, while the most visible and striking symbol of communist failure seen around the world, brought little satisfaction.
It was not just a historical slap in the face. It was a human tragedy, splitting families, separating husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, and dividing a people desperate to be together. Among Berlin's residents were the fearless and determined, those ready to escape at any risk. During the wall's existence, at least 5,075 people successfully crossed it, including 574 East German soldiers and security officers. The very first escapee was 19-year-old border guard Konrad Schumann, who leapt over barbed wire on Bernauer Strasse. His photograph, famously titled "The Leap to Freedom," would circulate around the world and become an enduring symbol of courage and defiance.
Train driver Harry Detterling stole a locomotive and 8 carriages, smashing through the iron gates at Albrechtskopf station to get over 24 people to the west. Wolfgang Engels, a member of the National People's Army, drove an armored personnel carrier through the wall. Perhaps the most famous underground escape was the so-called Tunnel 29. Built from west to east over several months, the tunnel stretched about 120 meters, and in the fall of 1962, 29 people escaped through it before the East German secret police, the Stasi, discovered and sealed it. 2 years later, Tunnel 57 allowed 57 more people to flee. In September 1979, 2 families even crossed the border in a homemade hot air balloon. Tragically, around 200 people died attempting to cross. Among them was Dieter Wolfert, a West German student helping a friend escape, who was betrayed by her and shot by East German guards. Chris Geffroy was fired upon while trying to cross the Brits Canal. Winfried Freudenberg died when his homemade balloon crashed. From the very beginning, the Berlin Wall was more than just an engineering or military structure. It became the ultimate symbol of oppression, inspiring artists to protest. The western side of the wall turned into a canvas for street artists. Filmmakers responded quickly as well. By October 1962, a thriller titled Escape from East Berlin hit theaters, dramatizing real-life events. Author John le Carré wrote The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which was later adapted into a film, further cementing the wall's place in culture as a symbol of confinement and resistance.
In West Berlin, rock icon David Bowie recorded one of his most famous songs, Heroes, a love song about a couple who risked everything to meet on opposite sides of the wall. That same year, the Sex Pistols released Holidays in the Sun, a track that openly mocked the barrier. During a concert in Berlin, singer Nina released balloons that drifted over the wall. She later wrote 99 Luftballons about how a simple flight of balloons might spark a global war. In the video for Elton John's song Nikita, the checkpoint by the Berlin Wall is shown, imagining how love might overcome that terrible divide. If you believe art is a powerful form of resistance, give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our weekly episodes. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union and began trying to ease tensions with the West through perestroika and a policy of new thinking. 2 years later, U.S. President Ronald Reagan visited West Berlin and spoke on a square in front of the Brandenburg Gate, still cut off by the wall. He addressed the Soviet leader directly. Mr. Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to these gates. Mr. Gorbachev, Open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The winds of freedom were beginning to stir across the Soviet bloc. Hungary was the first to take a bold step. It opened its border with Austria.
Thousands of East Germans took advantage of the opening to flee to West Germany, while massive demonstrations demanding freedom and reform erupted across the GDR. On the evening of November 9th, 1989, East German official Günter Schabowski held a press conference in Berlin announcing that citizens were now allowed to freely cross the border at existing checkpoints. When a journalist asked when this rule would take effect, Schabowski, caught off guard, blurted out, "Immediately!" The announcement was broadcast live, and soon tens of thousands gathered at East Berlin checkpoints. The situation became tense. Shift leader Colonel Harold Jaeger, in charge of passport control, contacted his operational command in Treptow and the ministry, but received no clear instructions. Faced with the crowd, he made a historic decision, not to follow orders to shoot, but to open the gates. The crowd surged forward in pure elation, awe, tears, and uncontainable joy. People crossed the border singing, laughing, and celebrating beside the Berlin Wall. It was one of those rare, truly inspiring moments when ordinary citizens triumphed and all the experts, officials, and border guards quietly stepped aside. Today, of the 155 kilometers of the wall, only fragments remain. The longest surviving section is the East Side Gallery, stretching 1,300 meters along Mühlenstrasse. In 1990, over 100 artists from around the world left their mark here. Among the most famous pieces are Dmitry Vrubel's "My God, Help Me to Survive This Deadly Love" and Birgit Kinder's "Test the Rest," a striking reminder of freedom, hope, and human resilience.
At Bernauer Strasse, a memorial now stands where a stretch of the border has been reconstructed, complete with a watchtower and the names of those who died engraved for posterity. A fairly long section of the wall still runs along Niederkirchner Strasse, and another watchtower survives near Potsdamer Platz. What do you think? Is there a modern, man-made border or wall today that deserves to be torn down? Tell us your thoughts in the comments.